Hello there, and welcome back to the Sleepy Facts. Tonight, we are going to look at an organization that does not just build rockets, but weaves dreams out of metal and fire. We are going to drift through the quiet, vast history of NASA. It is a place where math meets magic, where silence is just as important as the sound of a launch, and where humans learn how to leave their home without ever really leaving the idea of it. If you are ready to let your mind float upward, away from the noise of the day, then just settle in. Let the rhythm of your breathing match the slow, steady turn of a satellite in the dark sky. You do not need to understand the equations. You only need to imagine the feeling of looking back at Earth for the first time. Long before the fire and the thunder of a liftoff, there was simply a line on a piece of paper. It began as a quiet shift in thought, a realization that the sky was not a ceiling, but a doorway. NASA was born from a need to explore not just with ships across the ocean, but with ships made of light and steel across the starry ocean. It started in an era of slide rules and chalk dust, where the brightest minds sat in rooms humming with the energy of possibility. They weren't just calculating trajectories. They were calculating how to touch the face of the infinite without falling apart. Imagine the atmosphere in those early rooms, a mix of cigarette smoke, coffee, and the heavy, electric weight of destiny. They were stitching together a suit out of fabric and sewing a capsule out of metal, trying to create a bubble of safety that could survive the harshest environment imaginable. And then came the machines that would try to carry this dream. In the beginning, they were small, almost fragile compared to what we know now. The Mercury capsules were like lonely tin cans perched on top of a firecracker. They were not built for comfort. They were built for the singular, intense purpose of survival. Inside, an astronaut was not a pilot in the traditional sense, but a passenger in a violently shaking room, strapped into a couch that was molded specifically to their spine. When you picture those first launches, do not think of the smooth roar of a modern engine. Think of a cage vibrating so hard that vision blurs and teeth rattle. Think of the animal violence of pure power being unleashed all at once. And then, after the shaking, after the crushing weight on the chest pushing you down into the seat, there comes a moment of impossible quiet. The engine cuts out. The shaking stops. And suddenly you are floating. You have crossed the invisible line where the air gives up and lets you go. In that silence, looking out the small, round window, the world changes. The blue curve of the horizon is not a line on a map anymore. It is a living, breathing edge of light. You can see weather patterns swirling like cream in coffee, vast storms that look like gentle swirls from that height. The sun does not rise and set the way it does on the ground. It comes up in an instant, a hard, bright line that snaps into existence, and the stars do not twinkle. They are fixed, steady points of light in a blackness that feels thick, like velvet. For those first travelers, the view was not just a picture, it was a spiritual reset. They saw that the borders we fight over on the ground are invisible from above. The lights of our cities looked like glowing embers scattered on a dark rug, fragile and beautiful. NASA gave us that perspective, the gift of the overview effect. It taught us that we are a crew on a single ship, sailing through a dark ocean together. But it was not always glorious in the way we see in movies. There was a profound loneliness to those early missions. When you are orbiting the Earth alone in a capsule the size of a phone booth, the silence is heavy. The only sounds are the hum of fans, the click of switches, and the sound of your own breathing and your heartbeat in your ears. There is no wind, no birds, no distant traffic, just the void. And in that void you are tethered to life by a thin metal shell and a radio connection to a room on the ground. That room, Mission Control, became the heartbeat of the astronauts. It was a place filled with rows of consoles and people in headsets, watching lines of data and wavy green screens. They were the eyes and ears of the man in the metal can. The voices coming through the headset, calm, professional, Texan, precise, were the only link to humanity. To hear a voice from home while floating above the Atlantic must have felt like hearing a whisper from another world. It created a rhythm of dependence, a quiet understanding that survival was a duet between the explorer in the sky and the support on the ground. There was also a deep, primal fear that they had to master. The fear of the unknown. Space was not empty in the way a closet is empty. It was empty in the way a cliff edge is empty. One wrong move, one seal failing, one calculation off by a fraction, and the cold vacuum would rush in. The early astronauts, the Mercury 7, were men with a particular kind of courage. It wasn't the courage of a soldier running into battle, loud and explosive. It was the courage of a man sitting in a chair, knowing that underneath him sat enough fuel to level a town, trusting a slide rule and a stranger with a radio. They sat on the launch pad, looking up at the sky that would soon try to kill them or make them immortal. Their hearts must have been hammering against their ribs, yet their voices on the loops were steady. They learned to regulate their fear like they regulated the oxygen levels. They turned panic into procedure. And in doing so, they became the first masters of the empty space between worlds. Think about the reentry. That is the part where the dream meets the atmosphere again. After drifting in the quiet, after seeing the world turn below you like a slow marble, you have to come back. And coming back is fire. The blunt bottom of the capsule hits the air, and the air cannot get out of the way fast enough. It compresses, heats up, and turns into plasma. The windows turn bright orange, then glowing violet. The heat shield is baking away, layer by layer, sacrificing itself so the human inside can live. It is a ride through a furnace inside a falling stone. The G-forces build up again, pushing the blood down from the head, dimming the vision. And then the wait. The black screen. The silence. Is the parachute coming? Did the heat shield hold? Those minutes must have stretched into hours. And then, the pop of the drogue's chute, the jerk of the main canopy, and the splash. The sudden return of the sound of waves and the smell of salt air. From the absolute silence of orbit to the chaotic noise of the ocean recovery. It is a transition from the divine to the mundane, but forever changed. We often forget how much of this was done with computers that had less power than the calculator in your phone. The brains of the Mercury and Gemini missions were heavy, clunky boxes that spooled tape and used magnetic cores. They were simple, direct machines. You didn't type a command, you plugged a wire into a board. There was no screen, no mouse. Just switches and lights. And yet they navigated by the stars. They used constellations as their map. The astronauts learned to recognize Orion and the Southern Cross not as pretty pictures, but as road signs in the dark. They used a sextant, a tool as old as sailing ships, to find their way in the ultimate sea. It connects us back to the ancient explorers who crossed oceans using the wind and the stars. NASA was just continuing that story, but the ocean was bigger, and the ships were fire. The early missions were also about the body. How does a human body react when it is no longer held down by gravity? In the Mercury flights, they found that you can eat, drink, and even sleep, though sleep comes hard when you are floating. Without the weight of the bed pushing against your back, you have to strap yourself down so you don't drift into a switch or a ventilation fan. Your arms float up in front of you like seaweed in a current. Tools don't stay on the table, they hover. Water forms wobbly spheres that bounce around the cabin. It is a playful physics, but also a disorienting one. Your inner ear, which tells you up from down based on gravity, gets confused. You feel like you are tumbling even when you are still. NASA had to learn how to keep a human healthy in a world where the rules of the body don't apply. They had to invent space food that wasn't just paste, and space suits that felt like a second skin. Flexible enough to work in but tough enough to keep the air in. Consider the silence of the spacewalk. Ed White's first steps outside the Gemini capsule. He didn't just open a door, he pushed the hatch open against the vacuum. And when he floated out, tethered only by a gold cord, he became the first human satellite. There is a video of him twisting and turning with a gold visor reflecting the earth below, holding a gas gun that pushes him around with puffs of oxygen. He looks like he is dancing. He looks entirely, profoundly free. But he is also entirely alone. If the tether broke, he would not fall, he would drift. He would become a permanent part of the scenery, orbiting the earth for decades, a silent statue in the dark. That tether is the most fragile thing in the universe at that moment. It represents the umbilical cord connecting the explorer to the mothership, and the mothership to the home planet. It is a visual reminder of how tentative our presence is here. We are visitors. We are allowed to stay only as long as we are careful and tethered. The rockets themselves, the red stones and the atlases, were beautiful beasts. They stood on the launch pad like needles waiting to thread the clouds. They were not the sleek, white towers of the shuttle era. They were often checkerboard patterns of black and white, or gleaming stainless steel that looked like polished silver in the Florida sun. They leaked liquid oxygen that formed clouds of ice around the base, making it look like the rocket was breathing cold mist even before it started breathing fire. When they ignited, the sound didn't just hit you, it moved through you. It rattled the windows of buildings miles away. It was a physical presence in the air. And as it climbed, leaving the tower behind, the smoke would curl and twist into shapes that looked like dragon tails before dissipating. The tower itself, the gantry, would often be painted in red and white stripes, looking like a barcode of industrial ambition. It was the scaffold from which we fell upward. And then there is the darkness between the missions. The waiting. The training. The endless hours in simulators. Astronauts spent thousands of hours in boxes that mimic the cockpit, practicing failures. Practicing the same switch throws over and over until muscle memory took over from the brain. They practiced emergencies that had never happened, learning to react with a calm that was almost unnatural. It was a mental discipline as much as a physical one. They had to learn to trust the machine more than their instincts. If a light turns red, you don't panic, you look at the checklist. You follow the line. You let the procedure be your courage. This culture of checklists and procedures is NASA's heartbeat. It is how they tame chaos. They break the impossible down into small, doable steps. Flip this switch. Read this gauge. Turn this dial. It makes a rocket launch not a leap of faith, but a logical progression of cause and effect. Even though, deep down, everyone knows that when you light a candle under a seat full of people, you are always making a deal with probability and hope. The control room, the famous mission control in Houston, became a character in itself. It was a floor of a building where the lights were never fully on, always dim to make the screens easier to read. The air was kept cool, pumped in to keep the machines and the men from overheating. Rows of consoles, each with a specific responsibility: guidance, flight dynamics, surgeon, ecom. Each position was a spoke in the wheel. And in the center, the flight director. The Capcom, the capsule communicator, was usually an astronaut themselves, someone who knew what it felt like to be in the can. They were the voice of calm. When things went wrong, and they often did, the alarms, the glitches, the flickering lights, the voice from Houston never changed pitch. It stayed steady. Houston, we have a problem. Not a scream, but a statement. A data point. That steadiness was the psychological anchor for the men flying at 17,000 miles an hour. It told them that panic was optional, and they chose not to select it. Let's imagine the view from the window again as we drift further into the history. The Earth at night. The electric spiderwebs of cities. The flashes of lightning storms and clouds that look like paper flashes in the dark. The aurora, the green and violet ribbons that wrap around the poles like glowing scarves. Seeing the aurora from above is different than seeing it from below. From below, you look up and wonder. From above, you look down and see the shield. You see the atmosphere glowing where the solar wind hits it, the planet defending itself against the sun. It makes the Earth feel alive, a creature breathing and glowing in the void. NASA's early missions gave us these eyes. They took the human gaze and moved it from the horizontal to the vertical. We stopped just looking across the valley and started looking down from the mountain peak. And that shift in perspective changed how we see ourselves. We are small. The Earth is small. But the combination of the two, the life on the rock, is incredibly rare and precious. As we leave the comfort of Earth's close orbit, the destination that pulls at the human imagination grows larger. It is the great pearl in the black sky, the silent companion that has watched our oceans rise and fall for billions of years. The Moon. For NASA, reaching it wasn't just a technical goal. It was a test of whether the human spirit could stretch across the terrifying emptiness to touch something ancient and untouched. To go there required building a machine that defied logic, a tower of power called the Saturn V. Imagine standing next to it. It was not just a rocket, it was a skyscraper lying on its side, gleaming white against the Florida grass. It stood 363 feet tall, a monument to engineering that seemed too large to ever move. And yet, when the engines ignited, it didn't just lift, it fled. The sound was a physical thing, a deep, resonant thunder that you felt in your chest more than you heard in your ears. It shook the ground for miles, a man-made earthquake created by fire and chemistry. People watched that fire climb and disappear into the clouds, knowing that on top of that pillar of flame sat 3 men in a small gumdrop of a cabin, riding a controlled explosion all the way to the stars. The journey to the moon took 3 days. 3 days of drifting in a metal canister, watching the world shrink from a massive marble to a tiny blue marble behind you. In that transit, the environment inside the ship was quiet, a mix of machine hum and the sound of Velcro and checklists. The astronauts floated, tethered to the walls, looking out the windows at a universe that was getting deeper by the hour. There was a specific kind of beauty to the view out of the windows of the command module. The stars didn't twinkle. They were steady, unwinking points of light. The sun was a fierce, unwinking white disk that turned the cabin into an oven if the shades weren't drawn. And the darkness between the stars was absolute. It wasn't the soft dark of a bedroom at night. It was a heavy, ink-like void that made the isolation feel infinite. You could feel the distance from home not just in miles, but in the texture of the silence. The radio connection to Earth was a thin lifeline, a voice crackling through the static, reminding them that they were still part of the human story. Then came the moment of separation. The command module, named Columbia, and the lunar module, named Eagle, had to undock in the silence of space. This was a delicate dance. One ship would stay behind, circling the moon alone, while the other would descend. Imagine the view from the window of the lunar lander as it pulled away. The command module, your only ride home, became a distant shape in the black, and below you, the moon rushed up to meet you. It wasn't like landing on Earth. There was no atmosphere to blur the edges. The craters were sharp, the mountains were jagged, and the horizon was incredibly close because the moon is small. The gray surface rushed towards them faster and faster, a landscape of stark, monochrome desolation. It was a world without color, painted in shades of charcoal and ash. The descent was the most dangerous part of the mission. The computer was overloaded, alarms were ringing in their ears, and the fuel gauge was ticking down to empty. They were flying blind, trusting the radar and the math, skimming over boulder fields that would have crushed them instantly. The tension in that cabin must have been thick enough to taste. The pilot, Buzz Aldrin, was calling out numbers, speeds, and altitudes. The commander, Neil Armstrong, was looking out the window, searching for a flat spot among the rocks and the shadows. Shadows on the moon are strange because the sun is so bright, and there is no air to scatter the light. The shadows are pitch black and incredibly sharp. It makes depth perception hard. Everything looks either flat or impossibly steep. But then, the blue light of the contact indicators lit up. Contact light! The spindly legs of the eagle had touched the dust. The engine shut down, and the silence returned instantly. They were there. They were sitting on another world, hovering above the ground on a cushion of exhaust gas that had just blown away the dust. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of ozone and metal, a sharp, electric smell. But outside, through the triangular window, was a landscape that defied earthly logic. It was a world of stillness. No wind. No birds. No trees. Just an ancient, battered gray stretching out to a curved horizon. The astronauts had to rest before going out. Imagine trying to sleep in that moment. You are light, only 1/6 of your Earth weight, but your mind is heavy with the knowledge of where you are. The suit you wear is your own personal spaceship. It keeps you alive. It pumps oxygen, cools your sweat, and protects you from the vacuum that wants to boil your blood. It is a stiff, uncomfortable cocoon, but it is the only thing keeping the universe out. Then, the hatch opened, and the ladder went down. Slowly, the white boot of a human being reached the rung. On Earth, gravity pulls you down the ladder fast. On the moon, you descend in slow motion, a gentle hop from rung to rung. This is where the script of human history changed. Neil Armstrong stepped off the footpad and into the dust. "That's one small step for man," he said, his voice radioed across the gulf. "One giant leap for mankind." And it was true. He wasn't stepping into just another place. He was stepping into the realm of the eternal. The dust was fine, like powdered flour, and it billowed up around his ankles in slow motion. Because there is no air to hold the dust down, the particles fall back at the same speed, creating little fountains of gray sand with every footstep. Walking on the moon was like learning to move again. The astronauts found that the easiest way to travel was a slow, loping hop. You push off, float for a second, and land softly. It looked like play, a dance in slow motion, but it was the only way to keep your balance. They moved through a stillness that was deafening. The silence of the moon is different from the silence of space. On space, you are in a ship. On the moon, you are standing on the ground, but there is no air to carry sound. The crunch of their boots under their feet, the click of their suit locks, even their own breathing, they couldn't hear it through the vacuum. They only heard what vibrated through their suit and through their bones. It created a strange detachment, like living in a dream where you are the only actor in a world that refuses to interact. The landscape around them was a testament to violence. The moon has no weather to heal its wounds. On Earth, rain washes the craters away, and wind smooths the mountains. On the moon, a crater made 4 billion years ago looks as fresh as one made yesterday. The ground is littered with glassy beads, melted by the heat of ancient impacts. The mountains look like sawteeth, sharp and unforgiving. It is a desolate beauty, a graveyard of impacts. But standing there, looking up at the sky, the most profound sight was not the gray horizon, but the earth. Hanging in the ink-black sky, looking like a glass marble, was home. It was half-lit, a swirl of blue and white against the absolute blackness. It was fragile. You could cover the earth with your thumb. And in that moment, holding up your thumb to block out your entire world, your entire history, every person you ever knew, you realize just how small we are. And yet how precious. That view, the Earthrise, changed NASA. It shifted the mission from a conquest of territory to a stewardship of life. They planted a flag. It was a symbolic gesture, a claim of presence. But because there is no wind, the flag had a metal rod sewn into the hem to hold it out. It looked like it was waving in a breeze that didn't exist. It stood stiff and bright against the gray, a splash of color in a monochrome world. They left a disc. It contained messages from the leaders of the world, not just America, but the Soviet Union and other nations. It was a declaration that this was a step for all people. And they left a plaque. Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon. We came in peace for all mankind. It was a humble note to leave in a place so vast and indifferent. It was a whisper to the universe. We were here, and we were curious. The tasks they performed were scientific, but they felt like rituals. They set up mirrors to bounce lasers back, to measure the exact distance between Earth and Moon. They drilled into the ground to pull up coarse samples of the rock. The rocks were old, older than anything on Earth. They were made of basalt, a dark volcanic rock that bubbled up from the interior billions of years ago. Moon rock was holding a piece of primordial time. It had no water. It had no fossils. It was a silent stone, waiting there to be picked up. The astronauts collected them in special bags, sealing them tight to keep the Earth's air from contaminating the Moon's ancient vacuum. These rocks were the real treasure of the mission. They would tell the story of how the Moon formed, perhaps from the debris of a collision between Earth and another planet long ago. They were the chapters of a book written in fire and waiting to be read. Imagine being the astronaut left alone in the command module, while the others were on the surface. Michael Collins had the loneliest job in history. He was the furthest human being from Earth ever. While his crewmates walked on the Moon, he circled above them, orbiting alone in the silence. He went behind the Moon, losing radio contact with Earth, losing contact with his friends. For 40 minutes at a time, he was entirely alone in the universe, drifting in a tin can over the gray landscape. He said he didn't feel lonely, he felt awareness. He felt like part of the architecture, a necessary cog in the machine that was the Apollo mission. He was the shepherd of the ship, the one who would bring them home. His orbit took him over the far side, the side of the Moon we never see from Earth. It is a landscape of rugged, battered highlands devoid of the smooth dark seas, the Maria, that make the face of the man in the Moon. It is a hidden world, looking out forever at the stars. The ascent from the Moon was a test of faith. The top half of the lunar module was the only part that mattered now. The bottom stage, the descent stage with its spider legs and engine, became the launch pad. It stayed behind, a monument to the landing. The ascent engine had to fire perfectly. There was no backup. If it didn't start, they would die there, their oxygen running out slowly, becoming two more statues in the gray dust. But the engine roared into life. It lifted the tiny ship off the surface, rising straight up, then tilting to chase the orbiting command module far above. They left the Moon as silently as they arrived, a speck of dust rising into the black, leaving the flag behind. The flag still stands there today. It is bleached white by the sun now, the colors likely faded to gray, but it is still there, waiting in the dust, guarding a footprint that doesn't erode because there is no wind to blow it away. The rendezvous in orbit was another ballet of math and motion. The Eagle had to catch the Columbia. Imagine floating in the void, scanning the black for a tiny glint of metal. The distances are vast, and the speeds are incredible. They are moving at thousands of miles an hour. But the computers, primitive as they were, guided them together. The docking happened with a gentle clunk, a vibration through the metal that meant safety. The hatch opened, and the three crewmates were reunited. The air in the command module must have smelled stale, but to them, it smelled like life. They transferred the rocks and the film canisters, precious cargo from the dead world to the living ship. The journey home was different. They were no longer explorers pushing outward, they were travelers returning. They crossed the void, the Moon shrinking behind them, the Earth growing in the window. They were carrying with them the perspective of the overview. They had seen the Earth not as a map, but as a living system. The colors of the oceans, the swirl of the clouds, the browns and greens of the continents. It was a palette of life in a dead universe. It made the fragile blue bubble feel incredibly vibrant. The return to Earth's gravity was violent. The command module hit the atmosphere at 25,000 miles per hour. The heat shield burned, carving a path of plasma through the sky. They were riding a fireball again. The G-forces pressed them down, testing their bodies one last time. Then the parachutes blossomed. The splashdown. The bobbing in the ocean. The smell of salt air and the recovery divers swimming through the waves to knock on the hatch. They were back. NASA's Apollo program wasn't just about planting a flag. It was about proving that we could go somewhere, do something impossible, and come back. It required 1 million systems to work perfectly, and the courage of a few to sit on top of the fire. It showed us that the boundaries we think are solid are actually permeable. We crossed the gulf of gravity. But more than that, it showed us the fragility of our home. From the moon, Earth is the only color in the universe. It is the only place where the sky is blue and the water is liquid. It made NASA the guardian of two worlds, the one we live on and the one we visit. The gray dust of the moon and the blue water of Earth, linked by a silver thread of technology and will. After the fire and the thunder of the moon rockets, the story of NASA softened. It moved from the roar of a one-time journey to the gentle, rhythmic hum of a commute. The era of the space shuttle arrived. It wasn't a needle that fell into the ocean anymore. It was a bird, a strange, beautiful machine that looked like an airplane but rode a pillar of fire into the sky. They called it the Orbiter, a name that suggests grace and repetition. It was designed to come home. Imagine watching a launch now. It wasn't just a towering white stick. It was a complex assembly of a huge orange fuel tank and two white rocket boosters on the sides, looking like candles on a birthday cake for a giant. When the engines lit, there wasn't just one deep roar. There was a rolling crackle of fire, a brilliant, cascading light that looked like a waterfall of sparks flowing down the side of the launch pad. And then, it would rise. Not just straight up, but rolling onto its back like a dancer, turning its belly to the clouds and climbing on a pillar of smoke that looked like a twisted rope of cotton. Inside that ship, the astronauts didn't sit up anymore. They lay on their backs, strapped into couches that tilted them back, staring up at the ceiling as the ground fell away. The acceleration pressed them into their seats, a heavy hand pushing down, but the vibration was smoother, more like a train ride than a rattling tin can. And then, the main engines would cut out. The solid boosters would fall away with a bright pop, and suddenly, the ship would be gliding. It was on its own, carried by the smaller engines of the orbiter itself. They were now officially astronauts, but they were also truck drivers and scientists, riding a reusable bus to work. The view from the flight deck windows was different too. They weren't looking at a shrinking moon or a vast void. They were looking at the curve of the Earth, hugging the planet close. The shuttle became a ferry, a bridge between the ground and the stars. Imagine the routine of life in low Earth orbit. The sun didn't rise and set once a day. It rose and set every 45 minutes. The sky was never black for long. It was a cycle of brilliant daylight and pitch black night, 16 times in a single day. This rhythm reset the body clock. Sleep came in short naps, squeezed between the working hours of deploying satellites or fixing things that broke in the cold. But the view was the compensation. With every dawn, the limb of the Earth would light up, a thin curve of electric blue and gold. The clouds looked like textured cotton, moving slowly in the swirl of the atmosphere. At night, the cities were the stars. Looking down, you didn't see the black void. You saw the gold and orange webs of human life, connecting the dots of cities like glowing circuitry on a dark board. It made Earth feel busy and alive, a humming machine of light and motion. Living in space became a lesson in fluid. Without gravity, water didn't pour. It gathered in wobbly spheres that floated in the cabin like crystal balls. Drinking water meant catching a bubble with your mouth and swallowing it before it floated away. Washing your hair was a challenge of chasing water droplets with a towel. The body adapted. Muscles didn't have to work against weight, so they softened, a sensation of relaxation that made astronauts feel like they were melting into the ship. The spine elongated, giving a feeling of being taller, of stretching out to fill the suit. It was a physical lightness that matched the lightness of the spirit. Floating in the middeck, looking out a small, round window at the blue curve, one could feel entirely at peace, suspended in a quiet bubble between the noisy planet below and the silent stars above. And then, NASA opened an eye that could see forever. The Hubble Space Telescope. It was a silver tube, the size of a bus, launched inside the shuttle to sit above the blur of the atmosphere. It wasn't looking down at Earth. It was looking out, deep into the past. Think of Hubble as a time machine. Because light takes time to travel, looking deep into space is looking deep into history. When Hubble stared at a patch of darkness that looked empty to our eyes, it stayed focused for days, collecting photons that had traveled for billions of years. And what it sent back was not just data, it was art. It was poetry written in light. The pillars of creation showed clouds of gas and dust where new stars were being born, towering structures that looked like ethereal mountains in the cosmos. Colors that don't exist on the surface of a planet, rust reds, glowing teals, deep violets, painted the darkness. The deep field images were the most humbling. They took a speck of sky, no bigger than a grain of sand held at arm's length, and revealed thousands of galaxies. Each swirl of light was an island universe, each containing billions of suns. It told us that the universe is not just big, it is incomprehensibly vast. It told us that the night sky above our heads is not just a curtain of darkness, it is a crowded ocean of history. Looking at those images makes the problems of the day feel incredibly small. It reminds us that we are a tiny part of a grand, quiet design. The silence between those galaxies must be absolute, a stillness that makes the quietest night on Earth feel loud. NASA gave us the glasses to see that beauty, turning the cold void into a gallery of wonder. While the shuttle was flying and Hubble was looking, NASA also started building homes in the sky. First, there was Skylab, a quiet workshop that was the converted upper stage of a rocket. It was a proof that we could stay, not just visit. Imagine floating through the hatch of Skylab, into a space large enough to do flips in. It had the feeling of a loft, a raw industrial space with exposed wires and panels, but with the best window in the solar system, the Apollo telescope mount. It was a place to study the sun, a fire that burned without sound, watching the solar flares and prominences dance in the vacuum. And then came the era of cooperation. The Russian station Mir, which means peace, or world, became a stepping stone. It was a tangled, growing organism of modules, a dragon of metal that spun slowly in the dark. It wasn't shiny, it looked worn, covered in dust from the travels of ships docking with it. But inside, it was a human haven. The air had a distinct smell, described as a mix of ozone, burnt metal, and old fumes, a smell that became known as the smell of space. From that cooperation grew the greatest house in history, the International Space Station. Imagine a structure the size of a football field, floating silently above the blue rim of the Earth. It is a sprawling city of modules, a laboratory that circles the planet every 90 minutes. It represents the best of us, nations that don't always get along on the ground, building a home together in the sky. Looking at the station, it looks like a mechanical insect, with golden wings that glow in the sun. Those wings are solar arrays, drinking starlight to power the computers and the life support systems that keep the air breathable and the temperature livable. It is a machine that eats light to keep humans alive. Inside the station, the hum is constant. It is not a loud noise, but a background vibration, like the sound of a refrigerator or a distant fan. It becomes the soundtrack of life in orbit. Astronauts there live months, sometimes years. They exercise for 2 hours every day on treadmills with bungee cords, sweating while running without going anywhere, fighting the slow decay of the bones that gravity protects. They eat tortillas and spicy food because crumbs are dangerous, float away and they could clog an air filter. They drink pouches of coffee while watching the continents roll by beneath their feet. They clip their sleeping bags to the wall so they don't float into a vent while they dream. Sleeping in space is like sleeping in a cloud, strapped gently to the wall, drifting in the darkness with the constant awareness that you are falling, but never hitting the ground. The view from the station's cupola, the glass dome with the 7 windows, is perhaps the most peaceful place in the universe. It is a bay window on the world. You can see the Earth curving away, the thin blue line of the atmosphere glowing like a neon rim. You can see the storms swirling, the vast deserts of sand, and the glittering reflections of the sun on the oceans. At night, the aurora borealis dances below you, curtains of green and red light swaying in the magnetic wind. It is a reminder that the planet is alive, protected by an invisible shield. Looking down from that glass bubble, the wars and borders that divide us on the surface are invisible. You see the shape of the land, the shape of the clouds, but not the lines we draw on maps. It gives a perspective that changes you. It makes the noise of politics and the rush of the news cycle feel distant, like static on a radio that you've turned down. NASA's journey in this era was about persistence. The shuttle had triumphs and terrible tragedies, times when the sky turned against us and the fire didn't lift, but swallowed. But the determination to return, to learn from the silence of the wreckage and build better machines, showed a resilience that is quietly heroic. It is the refusal to stay grounded. It is the insistence that we belong up there, that our curiosity is stronger than our fear. The astronauts who fly these ships understand the bargain. They are trading the comfort of gravity for the privilege of seeing the curve. They are leaving their families to live in a tin can where a micrometeoroid could puncture the wall or a computer could fail. But they do it because the view is worth the risk, and because the work of expanding our understanding is work that must be done. Think of the silence outside the hull of the station. It is minus 270 degrees Celsius, a cold that freezes thought instantly. The vacuum is a hungry emptiness that wants to equalize pressure, to crush the life inside. And yet, inside those metal walls, there is warmth, there is coffee, there is laughter, and there is the quiet beep of machines monitoring the heartbeats of the ship. It is a fragile bubble of existence in a vast, indifferent ocean. The contrast creates a kind of beauty. The fragility of life in the face of the infinite. It makes the bond between the crew stronger, a reliance on each other that is total. You are keeping each other alive. Every breath you take is filtered by machines your friend fixed. Every calorie you eat is packed by a hand on the ground that is thinking of you. It is a tapestry of connections spanning the distance between the dust and the stars. The science done in these floating homes is profound. It is not just about looking at stars. It is about studying ourselves. They grow protein crystals that can't grow on Earth, perfect shapes that help design medicines. They study the fluids in their own bodies, watching how the heart pumps and how the blood flows when there is no gravity pulling it down. They study flames that burn as blue spheres, teaching us how combustion works so we can build cleaner engines on Earth. The station is a laboratory of the impossible, a place where the rules of the daily world are suspended so we can understand the fundamental laws of nature better. It is a classroom where the students are floating, and the lessons are written in the language of physics. As the shuttle flew its missions and the station grew its modules, NASA was also sending eyes elsewhere. Probes that didn't carry people, but carried cameras and sensors. The Spirit and Opportunity rovers on Mars were like robotic geologists. They didn't have the romance of the Apollo astronauts, but they had a kind of dogged persistence. They trundled across the red dust, their solar wings soaking up the faint sun, drilling into rocks to taste the minerals inside. They found that Mars was once wet, a place with rivers and lakes, a world that might have been friendly to life long ago. The silence of these robots on Mars is profound. No wind in the microphones, just the crunch of wheels in the sand and the click of instruments. They are our avatars, our proxy explorers, carrying our curiosity to places where we cannot yet walk. They are the lonely wanderers, moving slowly at the pace of a remote control from another planet, sleeping through the freezing Martian nights and waking up to a pink, dusty dawn. And so, the story moves. From the fire of the launch to the hum of the station. From the view of the whole Earth to the taste of a rock on a distant world. NASA is the thread that connects these moments. It is the constant hand reaching up, asking the sky to give up its secrets. It is an organization of dreamers and engineers, of accountants and adventurers. It shows us that while the universe is vast and empty, it is also full of wonders if we have the patience to look. The quiet dedication of the people who sit in the control rooms, the steady hands of the astronauts who strap themselves to the fire, and the silent machines that drift in the dark, they are all part of a single, slow journey outward. A journey that takes us away from our home to understand what home really means. As we drift further from the warmth of our sun, the nature of exploration changes. It shifts from the routine of orbit to the profound loneliness of the deep void. We send our ships not just to visit, but to leave. To wander into the dark forever. Consider the Voyager probes. They are the ultimate sleepwalkers of NASA. Launched decades ago, they are now farther away than anything human-made has ever gone. Imagine what it is like to be Voyager 1. It is a lonely robot, a brain the size of a cereal box, riding a metal body that looks like a large radio antenna on a stick. It has been traveling for over 40 years. It moves at 10 miles a second, a speed that would get you from New York to Los Angeles in a minute, but in the vastness of space, it is crawling. It is crawling through a domain where distance is measured in light hours, not miles. The silence around Voyager is absolute. There is no air to carry sound, no wind to push against it. It is gliding through a perfect, unbroken stillness. The only sounds it knows are the hum of its own radioisotope generator, a nuclear heart that beats slowly, providing power from the decay of metal, and the click of its instruments turning to look at the stars. It is a machine with a ghostly mission. It entered interstellar space, crossing the boundary where the sun's wind fades away and the galactic wind takes over. It is floating in the Milky Way now, a tiny synthetic speck in the giant swirl of stars. And on its side, it carries a golden record. It is a phonograph disc made of copper, plated in gold. It is a message in a bottle thrown into the cosmic ocean. On that record are sounds of Earth. It is a time capsule of the third planet from the sun. It contains the sound of a kiss, the sound of a mother speaking to her child, the wind through the trees, and the crashing of waves. It contains greetings in 55 languages, a chorus of hello from a species reaching out. And it contains music. Bach, Beethoven, Chuck Berry, Navajo chants. It is a serenade to the void. The hope that someone, or something, might find it one day is a beautiful, fragile hope. It is an act of optimism. We don't know if there is anyone there. The silence might be empty, or it might be full of listeners we can't imagine. But sending Voyager is like whispering a secret into a dark cave and waiting for an echo that might never come. It is a gesture of peace, a way of saying, "We were here. We were alive, and we were curious." The silence around Voyager is absolute. There is no air to carry sound, no wind to push against it. It is gliding through a perfect, unbroken stillness. The only sounds it knows are the hum of its own radioisotope generator, a nuclear heart that beats slowly, providing power from the decay of metal, and the click of its instruments turning to look at the stars. It is a machine with a ghostly mission. It entered interstellar space, crossing the boundary where the sun's wind fades away and the galactic wind takes over. It is floating in the Milky Way now, a tiny synthetic speck in the giant swirl of stars. And on its side, it carries a golden record. It is a phonograph disc made of copper, plated in gold. It is a message in a bottle thrown into the cosmic ocean. On that record are sounds of Earth. It is a time capsule of the third planet from the sun. It contains the sound of a kiss, the sound of a mother speaking to her child, the wind through the trees, and the crashing of waves. It contains greetings in 55 languages, a chorus of hello from a species reaching out. And it contains music. Bach, Beethoven, Chuck Berry, Navajo chants. It is a serenade to the void. The hope that someone, or something, might find it one day is a beautiful, fragile hope. It is an act of optimism. We don't know if there is anyone there. The silence might be empty, or it might be full of listeners we can't imagine. But sending Voyager is like whispering a secret into a dark cave and waiting for an echo that might never come. It is a gesture of peace, a way of saying, "We were here. We were alive, and we were curious." And while Voyager left the solar system, other ships turned their eyes to the red planet, Mars. It is a world that has haunted our imagination for centuries. From Earth, it looks like a ruby, a bright, angry eye in the night sky. But up close, it is a desert of rust. The sky on Mars is not blue. It is a butterscotch color, a pale, dusty pinkish beige during the day, turning into a deep, eerie blue at sunset. The dust there is fine, like talcum powder, and it covers everything. The rovers, Spirit, Opportunity, Curiosity, Perseverance, are like lonely monks wandering a vast, empty monastery. They roll slowly, their wheels crunching over the iron-red soil. Imagine the silence of Mars. There is no birdsong, no insect buzz. The wind blows, but it is thin, barely able to lift the dust. It whispers over the dunes. The rovers wake up when the sun hits their solar panels, and they go to sleep when the batteries fade. They live by the rhythm of the Martian day, which is slightly longer than an Earth day. They drill into rocks, tasting the minerals inside, looking for the ghost of water that flowed there billions of years ago. They found that Mars was once wet. It had rivers, lakes, maybe even an ocean. It was a world that could have held life. Now it is frozen, locked in an ice age that has lasted for eons. The rovers are finding the scars of that past. They find dry riverbeds that look like empty veins on the surface of the planet. They find minerals that only form in water. But the most profound sound from Mars was not a geological discovery. It was the sound of a Martian breeze. Or rather, the vibration of the rover moving. The microphone picked up the sound of the wind against the instrument, the low hum of the machinery. When the engineers sped it up, they could hear the high-pitched scratch of the metal wheels spinning in the dust. It was the sound of a human footstep on another world, even if the foot was made of aluminum and the step was robotic. It was a tiny noise in a huge silence. Opportunity, the rover that was supposed to last 90 days, survived for 15 years. It rolled miles and miles, a marathon on wheels. It got stuck in a sand dune once, and its operators on Earth played a song to wake it up, so they sang, "Here Comes the Sun," by the Beatles to a robot on Mars. That is a lovely, surreal connection. A song written in London, played in California, heard on Mars. Look deeper into the solar system, to the gas giants. Jupiter and Saturn. NASA sent ships there to dance with the storms. The Galileo probe dropped into Jupiter, a suicide dive into the largest planet. It fell through clouds of ammonia and hydrogen, deeper and deeper, into pressures that would crush a submarine like a soda can. It was the first time we touched the atmosphere of another giant. It sent back data until it melted, until it vaporized into the very wind it was studying. It was a sacrifice to knowledge. It became a ghost in the clouds, a permanent part of the Jovian storm. And then Saturn. The Cassini mission was a masterpiece of exploration. It spent 13 years circling the ring jewel. It showed us Saturn not just as a planet, but as a system of moons and rings that defied belief. The rings of Saturn are not solid, they are rivers of ice. They are billions of chunks, from grains of dust to houses of ice, all circling in a flat, glowing plane. From a distance, they look smooth, like a groove on a vinyl record. But up close, as Cassini flew through the gap between the rings, they looked like a blizzard of crystals, a chaotic sea of white and gold. The gaps between the rings are kept open by tiny, shepherd moons that clear a path like a sheepdog herding sheep. Cassini gave us the view of a lifetime. It saw the storms on Saturn, the hexagon at the North Pole, a geometric hurricane that persists without changing shape. It saw the moon Enceladus, a world of ice that has geysers at its south pole. It spits water and ice into space, creating a halo around itself. The water comes from a global ocean hidden beneath the ice, a salty dark sea that might have the ingredients for life. Cassini flew through that plume, tasting the ocean without touching it. It flew into the breath of another world to see if it was friendly. And finally, after its fuel ran out, after it had mapped the system and taken its million pictures, NASA directed Cassini into Saturn. It was a grand finale. They didn't want to risk the probe crashing into a moon like Enceladus or Titan that might hold life. So, they sent it into the planet. Imagine the final moments of Cassini. It turned its antenna toward Earth one last time, sending its data like a dying breath. Then it turned toward the clouds. It entered the atmosphere. The air rushed past it, faster and faster. The friction heated it up until it began to glow. It disintegrated, melting and burning, becoming part of the very gas it had studied for 13 years. It was a beautiful, tragic end. A ship of fire returning to the source of its fascination. It is now part of Saturn, a permanent monument to our curiosity. We also sent eyes to see the beginning. The James Webb Space Telescope. It is a golden giant, a sunshield the size of a tennis court that looks like origami. It sits at a point in space called Lagrange 2, a place where the gravity of the Earth and the Sun balance out, allowing it to float still. It is cold there, very cold, which is what Webb needs. It doesn't look at visible light like Hubble, it looks at heat. It looks at the infrared. This allows it to see through the dust of the universe. It can see further back in time than any machine before. It looks at the first galaxies that formed after the Big Bang. It is looking at the childhood of the cosmos. Think of what Webb sees. It sees ancient photons that have traveled for 13 billion years to hit its mirror. It sees the universe when it was young, chaotic, and hot. It sees galaxies colliding, merging, and forming the structures we see today. It is an archaeologist of light. It digs into the deep past to tell us where we came from. The images it sends back are pillars of creation, clouds of gas and dust where stars are igniting. They are cosmic mountains, vast structures that look like a hand reaching out from the darkness. The colors are false, translated from infrared to visible light, but they represent real physics. The gold of dust, the red of distance, the blue of starbirth. It is a view of the universe that is invisible to our eyes, a hidden layer of beauty that was waiting for us to build the right glasses to see it. These missions, to the gas giants and the deep field, are about perspective. They show us that the solar system is not a quiet neighborhood. It is a dynamic, violent, and beautiful place. Jupiter's storm, the Great Red Spot, is a hurricane that has been raging for hundreds of years, big enough to swallow 2 Earths. The moon Titan has rain of methane and lakes of hydrocarbons. It has a thick atmosphere, a soupy orange fog that hides the surface. It is a world so alien that if you stood on it, your lungs couldn't breathe the air, but you could weigh a little less, and you could skip a stone across a lake of gasoline. NASA showed us that. We learned that the moons of planets are worlds in their own right. Europa, with its ice shell and hidden ocean. Io, with its sulfurous volcanoes. Triton, orbiting backwards, a captured ice ball that shoots geysers of nitrogen. The silence of these places is the dominant feeling. The silence of the void between the planets is heavy. It presses on the ships. To travel there is to endure the boredom of the cruise phase, where nothing happens for months or years. The spacecraft spins in the dark, its antennas fixed on a point of light that might be a star or might be Earth. The radio signals take hours to reach home. If you shouted at Jupiter, no one on Earth would hear you until an hour later. The communication lag is a physical reminder of distance. It creates a solitude for the mission controllers. They are flying a ship by remote control, but the ship is so far away that it is in the past tense by the time the signal arrives. NASA has also sent ships to Pluto, the New Horizons probe. It flew for 9 years to reach the dwarf planet. It was a surprise. We thought Pluto was a dead rock of ice. New Horizons found a world of activity. It has mountains made of water ice, as hard as rock, rising high above a surface of nitrogen ice. It has a plain of ice shaped like a heart. It has a hazy blue atmosphere, thin and scattered. It looks like a bruised peach, a delicate world on the edge of the system. The flyby was a fast hello. New Horizons couldn't stop. It was moving too fast. It took its pictures and kept going, heading out into the Kuiper Belt, the ring of debris that circles the solar system. It is now following Voyager, another ghost in the dark, carrying the ashes of its discoverer, Clyde Tombaugh, on a digital chip. The beauty of these robotic explorers is their loyalty. They do what they are told, even when they are millions of miles away. They turn to face the sun to warm their circuits. They fold their solar panels to go into shadow. They take pictures of dust storms and sunsets and send them home with the loyalty of a dog. They are our eyes and ears in places we cannot survive. They allow us to be present in the furnace of Venus and the cold of Mars without risking our own lives. They extend the human nervous system into the void. We feel what they touch. We grieve when opportunity dies in a dust storm, silent and alone on a cold hill. We cheer when perseverance climbs a sharp ridge and finds a new rock. We are emotionally invested in these machines because they are us. They are our curiosity made manifest in metal and silicon. Consider the future that NASA is building now. The return to the moon, the Artemis program. It is not just flags and footsteps this time. It is the plan to stay. To build a gateway, a station orbiting the moon that acts as a stepping stone to everywhere else. We are going back to the lunar South Pole, to the places of permanent shadow where the ice is. The moon is not just a destination anymore, it is a practice ground for Mars. We have to learn to live off the land. To use the ice for water, for air, for fuel. To make the soil grow plants. It is a shift from exploration to habitation. The silence of the moon will be broken by the hum of habitats, by the sound of drills mining ice, by the voices of astronauts living in the lava tubes, underground caves carved by ancient lava. And from there, the gaze turns to the red horizon. Mars. The dream of humans on Mars. It is a long, dangerous journey. 6 to 9 months in a tin can, floating in the dark between two worlds. When you arrive, you can't come back easily. The planets have to align. You are there for a year or two, waiting for the window to open again. It is a commitment. It is a move, not a trip. The silence of Mars will be the new home silence. The thin wind, the distant sun, the red dust. It will be a life of living in a bubble, dependent on machines for every breath. But the view will be incomparable. They are our eyes and ears in places we cannot survive. They allow us to be present in the furnace of Venus and the cold of Mars without risking our own lives. They extend the human nervous system into the void. We feel what they touch. We grieve when opportunity dies in a dust storm, silent and alone on a cold hill. We cheer when perseverance climbs a sharp ridge and finds a new rock. We are emotionally invested in these machines because they are us. They are our curiosity made manifest in metal and silicon. Consider the future that NASA is building now. The return to the moon, the Artemis program. It is not just flags and footsteps this time. It is the plan to stay. To build a gateway, a station orbiting the moon that acts as a stepping stone to everywhere else. We are going back to the lunar South Pole, to the places of permanent shadow where the ice is. The moon is not just a destination anymore, it is a practice ground for Mars. We have to learn to live off the land. To use the ice for water, for air, for fuel. To make the soil grow plants. It is a shift from exploration to habitation. The silence of the moon will be broken by the hum of habitats, by the sound of drills mining ice, by the voices of astronauts living in the lava tubes, underground caves carved by ancient lava. And from there, the gaze turns to the red horizon. Mars. The dream of humans on Mars. It is a long, dangerous journey. 6 to 9 months in a tin can, floating in the dark between two worlds. When you arrive, you can't come back easily. The planets have to align. You are there for a year or two, waiting for the window to open again. It is a commitment. It is a move, not a trip. The silence of Mars will be the new home silence. The thin wind, the distant sun, the red dust. It will be a life of living in a bubble, dependent on machines for every breath. But the view will be incomparable. As our journey through the quiet archives of NASA slows, we bring our gaze back from the cold edge of the solar system to the warm, breathing world we left behind. We have drifted past the silence of the moon, the rusted dust of Mars, and the icy rings of the giants. We have listened to the hum of the machines and imagined the solitude of the pilots. Now we think about the return. What is it like to come back? After seeing the Earth as a marble, a fragile swirl of blue and white in a void of black, what does it feel like to feel the weight of the world again? The astronauts who have made this return speak of a shift deep inside. They call it the overview effect. But it is more than just a view. It is a profound internal rearrangement. When you see the planet with no borders, no lines drawn on maps, the artificial divisions that occupy our daily lives simply dissolve. You cannot see the difference between one country and another. You only see the land and the clouds, the water and the light. Coming home to Earth is a sensory shock. After the sterile, recycled air of a capsule, the first breath of terrestrial air feels thick and rich, almost overwhelming. It smells of life, of damp soil, of pine needles, of rain on hot asphalt. The air feels heavy in the lungs because gravity is pulling it down, pressing it into the chest. Gravity itself feels like a heavy, welcoming blanket after the float of space. The blood rushes back down to the legs, making them feel swollen and strange. The body has to relearn how to walk, how to carry its own weight. Every step feels like a negotiation with the ground. But the colors of Earth are riotous after the monochrome of the moon or the red-gray of Mars. The green of trees hits the eyes with an intensity that is almost painful. The blue of the sky is a comfort, a soft ceiling that feels protective compared to the terrifying openness of the void. The sound of birds, the wind in the leaves, the distant hum of traffic, it is a chaotic, noisy symphony that tells you you are back. You are back in the soup of life, surrounded by a million invisible microbes and a billion beating hearts. It is a transition from the eternal silence of the cosmos to the frantic, temporary noise of the living. This return grounds the dreamer. It reminds us that while our curiosity pulls us outward, our biology roots us here. NASA is the bridge between these two desires. It is the mechanism that allows the spirit to wander while the body remains safe. The machines we build are the hands we reach into the dark. They touch what we cannot touch, see what we cannot see, and feel what we cannot feel. The robotic probes that are now drifting in the interstellar void, like the Voyagers and the New Horizons, are our emissaries. They carry our golden records, our signatures, and our greetings etched onto metal discs. They are the message in the bottle thrown into the cosmic ocean. Even if no one ever finds them, even if they drift for 1 billion years until their power dies and their metal turns to dust, the act of sending them matters. It is an assertion of existence. It is saying, "We were here. We looked up. We wondered." It is a way of painting our name on the canvas of the universe, a signature that might last longer than the mountains. Think of the legacy of NASA not just in machines, but in the mind. The way we see the sky has changed forever. Before, it was a roof of lights. Now, we know it is a destination. We know that the points of light are suns, possibly with their own worlds spinning around them. We know that the darkness between them is not empty, but filled with gas and dust and gravity, knitting the universe together. NASA has turned us from a species looking up at the moon to a species looking down at our planet. And that shift in perspective is the most valuable cargo they have ever brought back. It changes how we treat the air, the water, and the land. It makes the thin blue line of the atmosphere seem not just a backdrop, but a lifeline. It makes the fragile biosphere seem like a rare flower that must be protected. When you have seen the Earth from a distance, you realize how easily it could break. It is a lifeboat in a sea of nothingness. Protecting it stops being a political choice and becomes a survival imperative. And now, as the story of NASA moves into its next chapters, we see the baton being passed. It is no longer just the realm of nations. We are seeing the rise of commercial ships, private companies building their own chariots to the stars. The landscape of the launch pad is changing. Instead of just the giant, monolithic rockets of the state, we are seeing sleek, reusable ships that look like they belong in a sci-fi painting. This new era promises routine. It promises that going to orbit might one day be as common as getting on an airplane. That routine changes the feeling of space. It takes the danger, the edge of the precipice, and sands it down. It makes the experience less about heroism and more about logistics. But as the accessibility grows, so does the population of the dreamers. More people will see the curve of the horizon with their own eyes. They will float, they will see the stars without the twinkle, and they will feel the silent awe of the void. And the more people who see it, the more the idea of us expands. If 1,000 people, then 1,000,000, have seen the Earth without borders, the collective human consciousness shifts. We dream now of worlds beyond the neighborhood. The telescopes like Webb are showing us the atmospheres of alien planets, the chemical fingerprints of worlds circling other suns. We are looking for the faint signal of another civilization, another radio crackle in the static. We are listening to the universe to see if we are alone, or if we are part of a choir. The silence so far is vast, but the search is young. NASA is the ear pressed against the wall of the cosmos, waiting for a whisper. And while we listen, we plan. We plan to go back to the moon, but this time to stay. To build the huts, the habs, the farms that will let us live off the land of another world. We look at the red dust of Mars and we see the rust not as decay, but as history. We see the promise of a second home, a backup drive for the human story. It is a grand, terrifying ambition. To move the consciousness of a species from one rock to another. It is a migration that will take centuries, but the first step is always the hardest. And the first step was taken decades ago. In the quiet of the night, looking up at the stars, we often feel small. We feel the weight of our problems, the brevity of our days. But the story of NASA is a reminder that we are also capable of incredible things. We are creatures of mud and breath who managed to touch the face of a star. We are animals who looked at the moon and decided to visit. We are beings who built a nervous system out of copper and light, a network of control and math, to carry our fragile bodies through the crushing vacuum. It is a testament to the power of curiosity. Curiosity is the itch that drove us out of the caves, across the oceans, and now into the black. It is the refusal to accept the horizon as a limit. It is the child in us looking at the map and asking, "What is beyond here?" As you lie here, in the soft dimness of your room, imagine that the night sky above you is not just a ceiling, but a map. Each point of light is a destination. Each dark patch is a mystery waiting for light. The silence of the room you are in is similar to the silence of space. It is a silence that allows you to hear the hum of your own thoughts, the rhythm of your own heart. Just as the astronauts had to trust their machines and their training to survive the void, you can trust the night to hold you. You can let the day drift away, let the worries burn up like the retrorocket fire. You are in orbit now. You are docked at the station of sleep. Your thoughts are the cargo, your breath is the life support. The universe turns slowly, endlessly. It has been turning long before us, and it will turn long after. The missions of NASA are just brief flashes in that turning, momentary sparks of curiosity in the dark. But they are our sparks. They represent the best of the human impulse, not to conquer, but to understand. Not to take, but to witness. We look at the stars and we feel a longing, a homesickness for a place we have never been. It is a beautiful ache. It drives us to build better ships, to write better code, to dream bigger dreams. It is the engine of the future. And for now, that future is a dream. It is the story you carry in your head as your eyes grow heavy. The vastness of space can be a lullaby if you let it. It tells you that big things are happening, that the universe is working perfectly without your worry. The planets are in their lanes. The probes are in their drift. The silence is holding it all together. You can surrender to that rhythm. You don't need to calculate the trajectory. You don't need to check the gauges. You just need to release the tension in your shoulders. Let your legs drop. Let your hands fall heavy. Let your breathing find its own tide, in and out, like the wash of an ocean on a shore of sand. Imagine the view from the window of a ship drifting between the stars. No up, no down. Just the soft glow of the galaxy around you. The peace of that void is absolute. It is a peace without conflict, without noise, without time. It is just the hum of existence. You are drifting in that hum now. You are the astronaut in the couch. Your bed is the capsule. The blanket is the heat shield protecting you from the cold. You are safe. You are anchored to the earth by the gravity of love and the routine of tomorrow. But tonight you can float. Let the story of the explorers fade into the darkness of your mind. Let the rockets burn out. Let the silence take over. You have done enough for today. You have traveled enough. The data is collected. The samples are stowed. The mission for now is to rest. It is the most important mission of all. To recharge the spirit. To mend the body. To let the subconscious drift where it needs to go, perhaps to visit its own moons, its own planets. So, close your eyes. The launch is over. The landing is smooth. The signal is fading to a soft carrier wave of white noise. Listen to it. It is the sound of the universe breathing. In and out. In and out. Match your breath to it. Slow it down. Let the darkness of the room become the velvet of the space between the stars. Let the silence be your companion, just as it was for the voyagers. You are not alone. You are part of the great, sleeping machinery of the world. The gears turn, the planets spin, the tides pull. All of it is working while you sleep. Thank you for floating with us through the history of NASA, here on the Sleepy Facts. I hope this gentle journey has helped you leave the noise of the day behind, drifting into a quieter, darker place where the only requirement is to be still. If this journey helped you find a moment of calm, perhaps consider joining us for another. We have many other worlds to visit, many other stories to tell, all whispered softly for your sleep. But for now, there is nothing else to calculate. Nothing else to fix. The checklist is complete. The systems are go for sleep. Let your thoughts untether like a probe leaving orbit. Let your mind expand into the dark, vast and free, with no boundaries, no walls. Just the quiet infinity. Dream well. Sleep well. And good night.